Hello, this is James Barkell.
And it is wonderful to have your company here on the centre court.
You are listening to the Coach Doctor podcast.
Strikes it beautifully and it's down the middle.
In this podcast series, we discuss all things coaching and sports science.
Beats one, beats a couple, still going.
Each episode will feature prominent coaches on the front line of their sport.
Across to MBE.
As well as some of the world's leading university academics who research what it takes to get the W.
All Blacks under big pressure again.
If there is an aspect of your coaching that needs some assistance, you can always count on the Coach Doctor to add life to your program.
Browning's having a terrific run. The first three to qualify. You betcha!
This is part 2 of my chat with Brian Ashton. In this part, we discuss Super VUCA coaches, discuss one of Brian's inspirational heroes, and talk about the road to the World Cup final with England in 2007. We also hear about Brian's forays into other sports, such as cricket, netball, and Premier League football. I hope you enjoyed part 2. Brian, one of the things you talk about is rugby being a VUCA game and the need for Super VUCA coaches. Can you explain what this means?
So the VUCA game is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. In the context of what you've just mentioned, what we're talking about. So the VUCA game, it comes from the military background for when the digital development, technological developments sort of changed the nature of warfare, and it became a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So volatile in rugby, it's a game of movement over approximately 8,400 square metres as full-size pitch, including the in-goal areas. And at any time, only 31 square metres occupied, 15 players in either team and a referee. So there's 8,369 square metres empty at any time on a pitch. But when people say, oh, there's no space in modern rugby, I always point out there's 8,369 square metres free, empty at any time in the game. So that's a complete non-starter. But the fact that it's a game of movement means a lot of volatility about it, a lot of dynamism, movement of players, movement of ball, and that potential chaos that you talked about before. So the U stands for uncertain, and that going into the game, you don't know what the form of your own players are going to be on the day. Some of your top players could have an off day. You don't know what the opposition players are going to play like. You know, you can plan all you like, and then suddenly they might come up with something different, or they might not play as well as good. You get injuries on the day that you can plan for, but you don't expect. You might get yellow cards or red cards, especially in the modern day where the game's refereeing, and you've got refereeing interpretations and decisions on the day that are completely out of your hands. The complex bit, the C bit, complex is just the laws of the game are so bloody complex. I mean, half the time I've no idea what's going on when I watch the game on TV. And the ambiguous part for me is I don't know whether it's the same where you are down under, but we've got these two gods of the game with possession and territory. You've got to win possession and territory. I've seen test matches won with 35% ball and similar amounts of territory as well. So it's a real ambiguous game. If you focus on things that actually you can win games in other ways, then that's the ambiguity bit. So we need Super VUCA coaches, and I must have talked about this in Australia when I was there too, did I?
Yeah.
To operate in these environments. And at Super VUCA, people who are vibrant, unreal, crazy and amazing. So the vibrant bit is we're radical optimists. We always believe in the positivity, realistically positive, proactive, purposeful and passionate about taking the game forward. So that's the vibrancy bit. The unreal bit, which is what sparked me to come up with this, we've just been talking about, is continually emerging with new ideas. So never being satisfied with how you coach or play the game. So pushing boundaries all the time, living on the edge, and sort of practicing the notion of impossibility. When people turn around and say, oh, you can't do that, that's impossible. So well, let's go out and practice it then and see what happens. Because until you do it, you don't know. So you got the unreal bit. Then for me, the most important bit in all this is to see we've got the crazy guys, the crazy coaches, crazy players. So I've just written down here, we're the missing link, right with it. We make outrageous ideas work. We're the mad scientists of the coaching world and the playing world. And we had the Dick Fosburys and Chris Laidlaws of the 21st century. Dick Fosbury, you might remember, was a high jumper that ran up 1968 and went over the bar backwards. No one had ever done it before. And they said, well, you can't do that. And he had the International Athletics Federation rule book in his bag. He took it out and said, show me in there where it says I can't. And of course it didn't. So he broke the world record. He won a gold medal and then retired because he'd done what he wanted to do. And Chris Laidlaw, you might remember, was the New Zealand scrum half in the 1960s, was the first scrum half, I believe, to demonstrate the spin pass in international rugby. Of course, that's all over the game now. So they're the sort of crazy guys. And the amazing bit is just the results of the vibrant, unreal and crazy. If you put those into operation, you get some amazing results. So can't quite work out where that came from originally, but for me, those are things that we ought to be trying to look to do. Understand it is a VUCA game. It's not a clean hands game. Things don't go to plan, as you mentioned right at the start all the time. There's an element of chaos in every game. We've got to be good enough, and players got to be good enough to recognise that and change it. And we've got to be able to provide an environment in which they can do that. We've got the tools and resources and opportunities to do it.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at the game because it is an ambiguous game. It doesn't matter how much you analyse the game because you can't predict what a fullback is going to do when they catch the ball. You can make a judgment that they return the kick with another kick, but they might run, they might chip kick, they might pass. Who knows what they're going to do? And you talked about teams that win test matches with 35% possession. And I can recall plenty of test matches where a team, especially the All Blacks, could win in those circumstances with less possession and less territory. So it is possible.
Well, I know, and I remember again, I didn't want to mention the All Blacks again, A, because you're Australian, B, because there are other sides around the world as well. But over the years, they have been the team to watch in terms of doing that. And I've seen them score 5 or 6 tries in a test match with 30% possession. You know, you just can't do that. Well, we've just done it. So, and it's sort of practicing again that notion of impossibility, eliminating the impossible from your mindset, because that becomes a really inhibiting way of coaching and playing the game.
Brian, talking about losing inhibitions as a coach, you previously mentioned that Muhammad Ali has had a big influence on the way you coach. Can you explain how?
Yeah, Ali was and is, even though he's not alive anymore, is my hero. I think everyone's got a hero in the sporting world, and he's mine. I suppose one of the reasons was that we were similar ages. Never met him. I had a meeting fixed up with him about 4 or 5 years before he died, but he was taken quite seriously a couple of weeks beforehand, so it was called off. A boxing commentator in the UK fixed up a meeting for me to fly to New York and meet him, but it never happened, which is quite sad from my point of view. Probably didn't bother him so much. But I just found him fascinating because he was something that was totally different from anything I'd ever seen before in the heavyweight boxing. He was a heavyweight build, but he actually boxed like a featherweight and moved around the ring like a featherweight. Unbelievable speed, a foot, unbelievable hand speed, a real risk taker. I mean, I don't know if ever saw him box at all, but you know, people said, well, he won't last long because he can't defend. Well, he never had to because he was so quick. He used to evade punches. So it's very difficult to get a punch on him. So he's a real risk taker. And I think he came out, and I've used this before, that a quote was, he or she who does not dare to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. So that was not only sport, but in life as well. You've got to be a risk taker to really achieve big things in life. And I'm actually, it's not here on my desk at the moment, I'm reading his book, again, that he wrote with his daughter, called The Soul of a Butterfly. I don't know whether you've ever heard of it or not, but geez, if not, get your hands on it. Any coach should get their hands on that because it's an amazing story of participating, coaching, and living life. It's amazing. It's got so many good things in it. But the other thing that really turned me on about Ali was when he fought George Foreman in 1974 in Zaire. At that stage, he was 34, I think he was. He'd had this suspension in his career where he'd not been allowed to box because they refused to fight in Vietnam. And Foreman was probably the hardest hitting heavyweight that had ever been on the world scene at that stage. And they fixed up a fight, and his medical staff tried to pull him out of the fight because they were genuinely afraid that he'd get some really serious injury or even worse. And he, being Muhammad Ali with his gift of the mouth and whatnot, he persuaded them that, no, I'll be fine, etc. And he went into the fight, and his plan was, because this was the way he fought, was to outmaneuver and outspeed and outdance. Outdance was the phrase he used, Foreman, over the 15 rounds. Well, unfortunately for him, they fought in, I think the temperature was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity was a ludicrously high level. And in his own words, after the fight, he said, the plan was 15 rounds of this. After 45 seconds, my legs had gone. So I've now got 14 rounds, 2 minutes and 15 seconds left to stay out of this guy's way. What am I going to do? Because I don't think you've ever boxed at all, James, but it's a pretty small ring when you get in there.
Yeah.
There ain't many hiding places, especially you've got two big men in there. So he came up with that rope-a-dope thing, where he just laid back on the ropes and let Foreman hit him. Now, you should think of the physical courage and the mental courage to allow that to happen. It's quite remarkable. And ultimately, Foreman tied himself out, and Ali knocked him out. But that was, and I think he mentioned the phrase, it was his paradigm shift approach to coaching. And it's something we talked about earlier on, doing something completely the opposite of what the opposition expects. So it's like beat the analyst.
Yeah.
So you can plan all you like. So we're playing against this other team. We know how they play. We've analysed them, this, that, and the other. They come out on the day and they're playing a completely different manner to the one in which you've analysed.
That's a great message for coaches, and it really ties into your philosophy of changing the game, because that's what Ali did to the sport of boxing. Brian, another question I wanted to ask you in terms of resources for coaches, and you mentioned Soul of a Butterfly by Ali. Are there any other books or resources that you think would be great for young coaches in their development?
One of the great things, I'm a great video watcher. I go on YouTube and dial in games from the past. And people say to me, yeah, but the modern game's different. I said, well, I know it's different. I said, but actually doesn't mean you can't learn from the past. And you watch like what that Wigan Bath game I spoke about. Watch Wigan score 3 tries in the last 10 minutes from 70 to 100 metres out, which never ever happened in rugby union. And just watch how they did it, what skills were there, etc., etc. And just watch games in the past and see how players operated. You know, some of the great players in the past are still relevant in today's game. So I think watching, becoming a student of the game for both coaches and players is really important. So the more you become a student, the more you understand the sort of nuances of the game.
Yeah.
Like ebb and flow. In terms of, I've just been reading a book, just finished it, called Performing Under Pressure by Dr. Kerry Evans. That's Kerry spelled C-E-R-I. So it's a Welsh spelling. But he's a guy I did some work with when I ran the England Rugby National Academy, because he just finished, I think, a scholarship at Oxford University, and he was playing football in England, and he formed this, he was a forensic psychiatrist by trade, and he formed this company called Gazing Performance, and they did some work for us on the mental side of the game. But because he was a practitioner in football, he played for New Zealand, and he played in the Old English First Division, which is now the Premiership. So he played right at the very top. He could translate what he felt was important mentally through his forensic psychiatrist background into the practicality of coaching and playing because of his experience as an international player. And so he was the first sort of psych guy, if you want to call him that. He would hate that. Mental skills guy, he used to call himself, that can actually apply things practically and very simply. And I think he still does, but I know he worked with New Zealand Rugby between 2010 and 2018 on the mental side of the game. And his book is called Performing Under Pressure. And the reason I mention that is because it's become very apparent to me during my 52 years of teaching and coaching the game that we've produced some fantastic technical coaches around the world. We've produced some great strength and conditioning guys who got players in top-notch physical state. But what we haven't produced is players who, I think they produce themselves, but we've not really focused on the mental side of the game over much. I think my experience is we talk a lot about it, but that's where it ends. We talk a lot about it. We don't actually do something. We don't actually action what we talk about in a very effective way to make a difference. In the moments when things go wrong, in the dark moments of the game, when suddenly, you know, the game's turned on its head and what we plan to do is not working, and you know the opposition are getting on top, and what do we need to do now? Can we focus on the detail of our game when things around us are going pear-shaped? We might have had someone sent off. The referee seems to be against us. There are so many diversions and distractions. Can we stay on focus on the tasks that we know we've got to do to win this game, which is all part of the mental side of it. So I think, you know, reading that book, it's great because there are lots of illustrations of not only rugby, but sport in general, of how these things can be applied in a very, very, very simple model. Yeah. A really simple model. It's the red to blue model, red being the diversion side and the blue being focus on the process and on task.
So you would suggest that's even a handy resources for coaches at the amateur level?
Oh, hell yeah. Well, it's any level. It's a resource for life, to be honest, as well as sport.
Okay, thanks for that, Brian. That's great. I want to move now on to some of your coaching experience with England.
Yeah.
You were involved with England in the Clive Woodward era, and then you were promoted to the head coaching role just before the Rugby World Cup in 2007.
Yeah.
At the World Cup, you started with a lacklustre performance against the USA before being smashed by South Africa 36-0. England managed to get through to the quarterfinals where you played Australia in Marseille. And I remember being in Marseille at the time and thinking we'll smash England. But England won and then went on all the way to the World Cup final. Can you tell me a bit about that tournament? What changed from those early games until the final?
Yeah, well, I've been appointed right at the end of 2006. So in fact, my first game was in 2007 with England. And effectively, I had 7 games as a lead into the tournament, where most of the teams had 4 years with their coaching staff. So we're sort of on the back foot. England rugby had been in a bit of a mess post 2003 because there'd not been any forward planning, and it sort of fallen after beat Australia in that final. It fell off the edge of a cliff, and that's when I went back to the National Academy to develop some young players, if possible, for future World Cups. So we weren't in a great place. There were no expectations, I don't think, on England certainly retaining the trophy. I mean, the big to get out of the group stages was probably the most of what people expected. That's what the expectations were. So we went into the tournament, and again, I used as our theme for the tournament. I know people talk about theming these days. Half a quote from Muhammad Ali. His quote was, he used to defy the impossible and shock the world. And I think that was a quote before he fought Sonny Liston in the early part of his life. So I sort of chopped that in half and thought, this is quite applicable to us. Because if we're going to do anything, we're going to have to shock the world. So our theme was STW, shock the world. And eventually I got my PA, who was fantastic. She's on any correspondence with players, right in the bottom corner, used this little STW. Eventually, a couple of other people saw this. They said, "What's the STW that keeps appearing?" And it was obviously for shock the world, but only us knew about it. And I said, "Oh no, it must be a typo or something like that." So we never told anyone. But that was our theme going in. And of course, we lost to South Africa. There were reasons why we lost to South Africa. Number one is they played their best game of the tournament, and they were clearly the best team in that tournament. And secondly, we were still undecided about our strongest team. If you want to point the finger at me for that people can do, but I don't think it was. It was just the situation we were in. And thirdly, our captain had been suspended. Both our fly halves had been injured. Jason Robinson, the fullback, had been injured. And so we were very much a team that trained together briefly on the Friday. And even then we had a couple of people drop out between then and the Saturday. So it was sort of a bit of a recipe for things not going well. South Africa were fantastic on the night and we were well beaten, and that was it. And of course, the press conference was highly entertaining afterwards because the world's press for lining up, including the English press, who were the worst of all, lining up to say, right, that's it, you know, you're out, you've gone, you won't get out of the group stages, this, that and the other. So you've got to deal with all that stuff. And but we got through to the group stage. We got through the group stages, and as you just mentioned, we were drawn against Australia in Marseille in the quarter-final. Now, the interesting thing for me leading up to that was your chief exec at the time was a guy called John O'Neill, I think, and he said something. I don't want to misquote him, so I'll just paraphrase what he said. Something to the effect that these guys shouldn't be on the same field as Australia because of what happened against South Africa. So that was I didn't have to give a team talk. I just got that printed out and put it on every room in the hotel and put it on the changing rooms on match day and this, that, and the other. And it's a massive motivation to us because it's very disrespectful. Whether he meant it to be like that or not, I don't know. And I'm sure the Australian players didn't think like that. But as you say, we went out and I thought we played exceptionally well. First 20, 25 minutes, we should have scored 2 or 3 tries. We should have been out of sight, but we weren't. Then Australia scored a try. I think Lottie Chukiri scored a try. But we dominated the game up front. And we had Wilkinson playing at 10, who sort of played a territorial game that we were talking about before, and it worked. And Australia weren't quite good enough on the day. I think they missed. Was Larkham injured? Or he retired? I can't remember.
From memory, Stephen Larkham was injured in the pool games, and Berwick Barnes played the quarter-final against England.
It was Berwick Barnes who played against us. Yeah, and a great player, I know that, but he didn't have his best game against us. And my suspicion is if Larkham had played, we would have lost. But he didn't, and we didn't. We won. So, yeah, so that obviously, the impetus from that, from a mental confidence point of view, was massive. And we got France next in the semi-final, and of course the tournament was being held in France, and they just beat the All Blacks in Cardiff. And so we were written off again. We'd gone from real high, beating Australia, to saying, well, that's fantastic, but they'll lose next week. This was the English media, this. So thanks, guys, yeah, for your support. But I looked at it completely opposite because I knew the French mentality, having played in France. I reckon that they probably thought we'd beat the All Blacks, we'll win the tournament. So they played their final the week before. Our final was actually against France.
Yeah.
In France. And we beat them, we outplayed them and we beat them. And suddenly found ourselves in the final again. And my immediate thought going into the final was, hey, South Africa must be thinking, what are these guys doing here in the final? After we blew them away in the second group game of the tournament. And they've just won 2 big games on the trot, and things often come in threes. Is there going to be a big surprise on finals day? Are they going to win the third one as well? Unfortunately, I don't think many of our players, to be honest, and I've said this before, I'm pretty sure that a few of our players didn't expect us to win against South Africa. They were just really grateful we got to the final. And that's how it turned out. It was a pretty close game. It wasn't a great game to watch, but we had opportunities to win it. We had a try disallowed, which the guy that scored, Mark Cueto, maintains to this day was a try. It would have put us in the lead, and South Africa never been behind to any team in the tournament. So that would have been interesting to see how they reacted to that. But one of the other things that was funny about the game, and it's funny how things go through your mind, maybe it's just me being a bit strange, but as I walked onto the field about 50 minutes before kickoff, both sides are out there, and it suddenly crossed my mind that 2 years, was it 2 years? No, yeah, 2005, I've been invited out by Heineken Meyer, who subsequently coached South Africa, who was coaching the Bulls, to spend 2 weeks with them in their pre-season training camp in South Africa. 9 of the starting 15 for South Africa that day, I'd actually coached 2 years prior to that. So of the 30 players starting the game, I coached 24 in the past 2 years. I think that's a bit unusual. That was a bit weird. I remember talking after the game to Fury Dupree, the English coach, who's coached 9 of us 2 years ago. So, but anyway, so yeah, we lost the final, but we put up a decent show. We could have won it, I think, but I think my belief in the fact that we might win it was stronger than some of the players' belief. If they're out on the field, then that's what determines it at the end of the day, not me sat in the stand.
Thanks, Brian. That provided some great insight into the World Cup experience. Just reading a few headlines after that first loss to South Africa, some of the comments included England hammered and humiliated. The current champions can expect to be out of the tournament by next Saturday. And this one was my favourite. Root canal surgery without an anaesthetic would have been less painful for England supporters. So to turn that around and only just lose the final was a massive effort from your team.
Yeah.
Moving away from rugby, more recently you've spent more time working with other sports, predominantly football. Can you tell me about this experience?
Yeah, well, probably best to start with other sports because predominantly, as you say, it has been in football. I've done some, I hate the word, I might have mentioned this earlier on, but I hate the word mentoring. I just hate it because I don't even know what it means. So, you know, you don't want to be operating something that you don't know the meaning of. So I've started using the word consigliere, which is an Italian word. And as I probably mentioned earlier, I lived and played in Italy during the 1970s. And it's an advisor. It's a mafia word, really. But obviously I use it not in a mafia sense. Because I think
you could be the godfather.
Yeah. I don't think I look like one. It kind of encapsulates more what I do, advise people. So going back to the question, I worked for a while, about 3 or 4 years with England cricket, and operated with 2 or 3 county coaches in our county coach system, but also with a guy called Paul Fabres, who went on to assist, and I've forgotten his name now, the Australian coach that England had.
I think it was Trevor Bayliss.
He was his assistant. I'm still in contact with him, which is good because cricket's my big game for me. It's one of my favourite. Well, it is my favourite sport, to be honest. But I also work with the head coach of England Netball. I've worked over a period of years with her in another role before she took the job, and now she's actually in the job, and as we speak, I think they won a series in New Zealand not long ago for the first time ever. And they just lost in a playoff, an international quad series against your girls, the Australians, who are world number 1, I think, or world champions. Yeah. So, well, that's been really interesting, and there's a connection right across sports in terms of a whole variety of things. But I think netball is one sport in terms of high tempo finding space that has sort of a great transfer over. From a mindset point of view, a great transfer over to our game of rugby. If we want to play like that, if we want to play a direct collision, contact orientated kicking game, then it's obviously there's no transfer whatsoever. So that, but we're absolutely right. What you said right at the start, that football has been the main area, really, alongside rugby, which I've worked. And I'm just looking back before we started our chat, and it's nearly 10, 11 years now that I've been working for the Premier League. So started around 2010, 2011. And initially, they instigated a course called ECAS, which is Elite Coach Apprenticeship Scheme. They wanted to up skills. They realised that a lot of foreign players are coming into the game. And the Premier League was populated, and still is, and probably ever will be because of the way it's organised, with lots of foreign players. And at one stage, I mean, the domestic players got down to around 30 or less than 30% of the people who are playing every Saturday, which is ridiculous. So they want to do something about it. So they introduced this Elite Coach Apprenticeship scheme initially in the Premier League itself, but then expanded it to the Football League too. So all 92 clubs who play professionally in England were included. And really it was, I was operating, as I said, as a conciliary, as part of what they called a coaching cell. So we had the academy manager. This was a young coach. He's academy manager at the club. We had myself as a coaching advisor, and they also had a professional skills advisor who talked about behavioural relationships and presentations and things like that. And there was a certain amount of overlapping, but it was, yeah, it was interesting. It was good. It was, and I think the aim was to develop world-leading young coaches, initially in the Premiership, but then throughout English football. I just put a couple of notes down before we started talking that I think two things happened straight away, that the clubs looked upon it as improving coaches just for the club.
Yeah.
The Premier League, we're talking about improving coaches in general across the game. The other thing was that, and I think this is probably very, very, well, I don't think, I know it's very common right across football and other academies I've been involved with as well, is to produce players to play in their first team, which I think is a bit of a cop-out. It's a very limited view of the way to operate. And, you know, and it certainly was in some clubs that players were only allowed to play in a certain way because that's the way the first team played.
Yeah.
So it was wrong. And what they should have been looking to do was develop coaches who could produce game-changing players who can either play in their club first team or go and play somewhere else in a game and have this game-changing effect. So that I did that for quite a few years, and I just, what was enjoyable was operating in a different area of sport. Yeah. Being able to go into clubs such as Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, amongst others. And most of my work was done in the north of England, and some of the lesser known clubs, probably internationally, such as Preston North End, Wigan Athletic, people like that. They do some amazing work at academy level with their coaches, and it's really interesting to go in and compare and contrast what they were doing with other sports. A massively wide variety of approaches, some from the ones I've just indicated, to some at Manchester United who literally just said, look, we're trying to produce players who are going to go on and play football however and wherever they want. So we give them all the skills and tools to be able to do that, which I thought was the right approach. And it's interesting that it's no surprise that every year they put out some figures on sort of a league table of who's been best at developing young players to go on and play at the top level again. Manchester United top it every year. Okay. That's it's not purely down to their approach, because obviously they've got the coaches with that mindset as well. So that's really good. So that, and then about 2 or 3 years into this, then the Premier League introduced what they called an EHOC thing, which is elite heads of coaching. So they decided that they wanted heads of coaching at academy level. Well, it was up to, from the age of 9 up to the age of under 23. It's just below the first team. So the heads of coaching would take over and do the role that people like myself have been doing in terms of developing coaches within the club, which was a great idea, I felt. So I became then a conciliary to the heads of coaching, similar clubs, etc. And they were essentially coach developers, and they were there to challenge and enhance the coaching levels within the clubs. And again, there was sort of differences of opinion, because some of the clubs wanted the coaches to operate with specific methodological and philosophical approaches that fitted their club, and that wasn't the aim of the EHOC at all. You know, this would produce coaches who would help produce game-changing coaches who would go on to produce game-changing players. So one of the big areas that was a real sticking point with some clubs was developing or allowing the coaches to be authentic, to coach in a way that best suited them, and it became a real sticking point in some clubs. So, you know, if you don't coach in an authentic manner, and I know this from personal experience, James, it limits your effectiveness.
Yeah.
Because you're almost playing a role. You know,
Okay.
you're almost on stage playing a role. You become a different person.
Yeah.
So I might be a very liberal, freewheeling sort of approach to life, and suddenly when I get in the coaching environment, they say, "Well, you can't do that. You know, you've got to become very conservative, system structures based, etc." And it doesn't suit the personality of the coach. So inevitably, whatever way you look at it, it reduces their effectiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. You need to be yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not, you know, it was never intended, either of these courses, that one cap fits all coaches or coach developers. You know, it was meant to be a sort of an adaptability, flexibility within the process. So just mentioning the word process there, I mean, literally the process I developed, which might be of interest to people who watch this over the years, was to go into the clubs, which we've not been allowed to do for the last 2 years because of the COVID situation, but still try to do it over the phone on Zoom meetings such as this, was to go into the clubs, watch a session if they were running it, or have a conversation and listen to what they were saying. And that is the biggest skill, I think, for a consigliere. It's not talking, it's listening to what the coaches want to talk about. And the most important part for me of listening is at the end of a sentence, and maybe the end of an answer to a question that you pose to the coach, is just to say nothing and just pause for sort of 10, 15 seconds, because that's very often when the most important things spill out of the mouth.
Yeah.
Because very often, and I used to do this, your immediate answer is almost to try and appease the question. So the whoever it is poses a question, and the person responding thinks, what's the sort of answer that he wants to hear? And then you filter your answer around that. But in fact, the questions were, just tell me what you think. You know, I don't care whether it agrees with what I think or not, whether it agrees with what the club thinks, what the world thinks, just tell me what you think. And then it's a good starting point. So it's watch sessions, listen to people talk, discuss immediately, if that was possible. Some coaches didn't like that. They wanted time to reflect, which is fine with me, although my preference would have been do it immediately, because you get something out of it immediately. Irrespective of whether it was immediate or not, then go away, reflect again on what we talked about, what they'd done, come back, discuss it, and then, if necessary, sort of reset one or two areas. Only if necessary, not if it wasn't compulsory, that reset one or two areas and off you go again. It was interesting. I felt, so I would have been, say it was 10 years ago, I would have been 65 when I started this. So you would have thought that my experience, both in coaching and life, would have encouraged me to behave in a more sensible manner, but it didn't. I felt early doors that I got to give them some feedback that would improvement at every meeting, which is ridiculous, because there's some of the meetings, the nature of the meeting or what had happened in the session they'd run didn't need any improvement.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you that, like, what do you do in those situations when, you know, they've done a really good session and you don't really have that much feedback to give other than positive feedback?
I would literally just ask the question, why did you do it? Why did you do that like this? And just listen. And it might be a tiny little thing comes out that you think, oh, maybe I would have done it differently, you know, as a consigliere. So I might just drop that into the conversation. Whether they take it on board or not is not a big deal if the session's gone really well, but they might do, and it might help. So I think I'm going to use the word mentor now because more people are probably familiar with it. You know, I think mentors are going to be really careful how much impact they think they have. You know, it's a bit like coaches on players. If the mentors approach it in the wrong way and try to dominate the environment, then they can be just as negative in their influence as coaches who try and dominate the environment out of players. So it's you've got to tread a really fine line, I think, in doing that.
Brian, you mentioned netball you felt had a really strong crossover. So this question probably is going to go back to your thoughts are on netball, but have you learned anything from any of the other sports, including netball, that you could apply to rugby?
Yeah, I think sort of the space awareness, communication. I'm talking specifically really about, well, let me start with two things about, I'm going to put netball and football together now, despite the fact football obviously is more of a collision game. When I said netball is not a collision game, I was watching an interview with the England head coach after the Australia final last week, and she said, it's a bit of a myth that it's not a collision game, because there are lots of collisions in it. Most of them, not all of them, most of them, she said, are accidental. So, but netball for me it's this searching for space, delivering ball into space before players arrive, requiring outstanding communication, very, very high tempo. So it's almost a non-stop running game. So there are very few pauses in it. I'm assuming you're familiar with netball, aren't you?
Yeah, very, very familiar. I think it's our biggest sport in our country over here. So.
Oh, no, it is. Yeah, well, you guys are top of the world. Well, you and New Zealand have been top of the world for the last 10, 12 years, I think. So that all those things transfer over as sort of principles of play and mindsets. Obviously, technically, the games are miles apart, but it's not that I'm thinking about. It's about principles of play and a mindset of how to operate.
Yeah.
And similarly in football, I'm very fortunate that I've got a friend who's a season ticket holder at Manchester City, who probably, well, in fact, I think they're 12 points ahead in the Premier League at the moment.
Yeah.
And, they've got a coach who's Pep Guardiola, who's forever fiddling with how the way they play. He's never satisfied. He always, even though they win tournaments and cups and leagues and whatnot, he's always trying to push the boundaries further, which I think is what any coach should do. But they've got some really good players to operate it, obviously. But going to watch them again reinforces what I've just been talking about. It's this ability of players to create space without the ball because of their consistent and constant movement and awareness of where defenders are placed, etc. And and obviously the awareness of the player on the ball too, what options are available, players scanning early, so when they receive the ball, they don't then make a decision. They've made the decision before they get the ball.
Yeah.
So the decision is made very quickly in the moment, defence no time to react, and if it's the right decision, then we're in business. So that's been really interesting. I actually wrote an article for one of the national newspapers a few years ago after I've been to a Manchester City game, comparing the similarity, you might not like hearing this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, the similarity between the way Manchester City played and the way the All Blacks were playing at the time.
Yeah.
And I did, the headline was, the copywriter put the headline on saying, if the All Blacks played football, this is what it would look like. It would look like Manchester City. Or it could have been vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I'm a massive believer. I'm very fortunate that I was brought up in the, I probably said right at the start of the podcast, in the street games era.
Yeah, you did.
Where we played all sports. And unknowingly, unwittingly, from the age of 6 or 7 onwards, I would play cricket, football, rugby, no coaches, nothing like that. And then I would imagine there was inevitably a transfer of mindsets and skills and all sorts of things between the games. So, I think that's probably driven to some extent the way I look at development of sport and of games and of coaching and of playing, because I think we've a lot to learn from each other. I think certainly in this part of the world, I think rugby union's been guilty in the past of not quite tunnel vision, but not far off. We are a different sport, even to rugby league. It took a hell of a long time to break that barrier down. Which is ridiculous. I mean, any sport that's played in an area that's got dynamic movement within it is going to have a lot of similarities to other sports.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only area where rugby and rugby league are so different is you pass the ball backwards to go forwards, and you've generally got a line of defenders in front of you, and it's like AFL, football, netball, basketball, they're 360-degree games. And I think that's the one thing with rugby is all that differentiates rugby and rugby league from those sports.
Yeah. And that, you're absolutely spot on. And that's why I said, my focus was looking at the sort of principles of play and the mindsets that the players and coaches had in these other sports.
Yeah.
Because the technical side of it is completely different.
Yeah.
But I think, just looking at rugby specifically, rugby union specifically, the two players that really stand out to me over the past 20 years or so of watching the game since it went professional and being involved in fact, I've been involved with teams that have played against these guys, not very successfully. It's Stephen Larkham in Australia and Dan Carter in New Zealand. And they're the two best players I've ever seen, both on screen and actually in the flesh, at operating these time-space continuums. Their understanding of time and space between themselves and the defence, on what that means, how they use that, and what that means for the players around them and outside them is absolutely magnificent. And it's really interesting. I think the more that systems and structures and analysis has come into the game, then the players who've got that capability seem to have diminished. That actually the time space continuum doesn't come into play. This is where we are on the field. This is what we're going to do. Yeah. Well, I would imagine that Larkham and Carter would have said, look, this is where we're on the field. This is how the game's going. This is what I'm going to do. Yeah. I don't care what the system said before the game, because I'm in the heat of the battle. I'm managing this. I'm driving this.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to do.
I think I'd agree with you with that.
Yeah, and I think when we were together 2 years ago now, isn't it, in Australia?
Yeah. Time flies.
I can't remember correctly. We had Andrew. Yeah, geez. Andrew Mertens came to talk to us, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
He used a phrase that I'd never heard before for a player playing in his position. He talked about being a project manager. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, he had looked at it very, very, like I guess an analytical sort of role of that position.
Yeah, this is a framework we want to build, but I'm the project manager on the field. Yeah. So actually, if I want to change the framework, then I do. I don't have to listen to what the coach tells me.
Yeah.
And I think, to design an environment and sessions that allow that to happen is fantastic.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. It's really good to hear, you talking about other sports and how you can relate to them and apply some of the philosophies from other sports into rugby, and vice versa as well.
Yeah, just before I go, and it's probably quite appropriate at the time, given the Ashes series recently. Well, from our point of view, the non-Ashes series, I
thought it was, mate. I was at the fifth day in Sydney, and that was the day when England had their only victory, really, wasn't
it? Yeah. Was it a victory? Was it a draw?
Yeah, it was a draw.
Yeah, it was a draw. England could have stayed at home and played just as well.
They could.
As much of a threat. Just briefly on the cricket side of things, I think one of the things I learned from talking to the top coaches in cricket in this country was the real mental robustness that players have in that game, especially playing the longer form of the game. Because you can be, and I remember talking to an ex-England player, Paul Collingwood, who played some years ago, who was involved in 2 or 3 game-saving innings that lasted over 3 or 4 sessions of play, and we were talking about the mental focus that players need to have in a situation like that, because at any stage that could have been it for him and for the team. Any ball you can be out.
Yeah.
Now, if you compare that with the other team sports, that you can win a man of the match award in football, in rugby, in netball, presumably as well, and still make 7 or 8 errors in the game. When you're batting in cricket, you make 1 error, you go and sit in the pavilion for the next 2 days.
Yeah, I find it really intriguing when I watch those, or cricket specifically, especially those top of the order batters. The mindset that they've got to take into those sorts of games, and the way that they, deal with that initial onslaught of fast bowlers, it's you know, the ball's often doing so much. There's a swing, there's, you know, what's going through their mind every ball. They've got to be focused. They've got to switch on for every ball. It's an amazing thing to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. When you think, you know, they might be facing the ball coming at 85 to 90 miles an hour as well.
Yeah.
There ain't much reaction time. But I think you just actually answered what I was going to say next about they've got to focus on every ball.
Yeah.
But for me, what was interesting, and talking to Paul Collingwood, was what they did between balls. Yeah. And he said what he used to do was he used to forget about he was playing cricket.
Okay.
Just forget about it completely. Because he said, if I played a shot and almost got an edge, or played and missed, or I got an edge and they dropped it, if I dwelt on that, then the chances are I wouldn't survive that long. Yeah. Because I have negative thoughts running through my head. So I used to eliminate what happened next. And then when the bowler was walking back, once the ball had made its way back to the ball, he's walking back to the end of his run. He said, right, he's to refocus back in again. He said, because people talk about how fantastic I was, he said, on those 3 occasions, to focus for 3 or 4 sessions, i.e. 6-8 hours.
Yeah.
Nobody can do that.
No.
So I didn't do that. I just focused for about 5 seconds, played my shot and switched off. And back in again, switched off. And I think that's got a tie into our sport as well, in that you focus on the task at hand. You know, you might be looking at the general picture, and I think the better players do, as the game is evolving and you're not directly involved. But as I said before, that when you receive the ball, and again, I think Larkham and Carter were fantastic, they knew what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. And it's that moment their brain would switch in, boom, I've got to do this right.
Yeah, yeah. It goes back to that mindset. Being able
job now.
Yeah, yeah.
Be able to slip from the general picture. I know what's going on. I know what needs to be done. Boom. Now I'm the instigator, and I go and do it correctly.
Yeah. Execute it.
I often amuses me. Yeah, when I hear coaches say, you know, you've got to really focus for the full 80 minutes. I'm thinking, Jesus. Although we're sort of breeding a bloody team of Einsteins.
When there's a breakdown in play and the ball's in touch or something, or you know, there's been a knock on or there's an injury. You know, these days they take 5 minutes to get an injury sorted. In those periods, switch off. You know, have some relaxation time. But as soon as the ball's back in play, then we focus again, and that's when we switch on. Is that how you'd look at it?
Yeah, and I think absolutely. And when there's no breaks in play, if things either for a group or an individual, more for an individual, I think, haven't gone particularly well in the last 2 or 3 minutes leading up to it, I think what might be useful is to have a trigger to get your focus back on task again.
Yeah.
You know, and I know because obviously I've worked with IRANs, etc. for some time, and they've worked pretty hard on the mental side of the game. That people like Brad Thorne, who played, he's now coaching in Queensland, isn't it?
Yeah, Queensland Reds. Yeah.
Yeah, he used to pour water over him any break in play. Yeah. So that would be a trigger to switch back onto what is my role.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I'm going to fulfil this for the next 5 minutes and get back in the swing of things again. Yeah, I think Richard McCaw in the 2015 World Cup played with a broken bone in his foot. I've heard that he used to stamp his foot, so that sort of the jolt of whatever pain it was, sort of switching back on again. Kieran Reid used to look just over the top of the stand, sort of looking into the distance to switch back in. And I can remember when I first coached. Do you remember Jason Robinson playing for England?
Yeah. Very good
when player. I first coached, yeah, absolutely. And he came from rugby league.
Yeah, Wigan.
And he was a born-again Christian. He'd been influenced by Vainga Tuigamala. Mm-hmm. And the very first training session I took, he taped his wrist up and put the sign of the cross on it.
Yeah, okay.
And I said, wow, I know that you're a born-again Christian. I said, why have you got that? He said, well, things are not going well. I just look at it. It's my trigger point to get back on focus.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to see how different people had different ways of operating in terms of staying on the task at hand.
Yeah. And you got to do what works for you at the end of the day.
Well, absolutely. And again, it's, we've said it a couple of times on this book. It's not one cat fits all.
Yeah.
So I think that raises, coaches have got to be very empathetic to players. They've got to know the players.
Yeah, definitely.
And find out how they operate, what they feel, how they live their lives, how they think about things, and help guide them in the best way possible to be successful from that point of view.
Rugby coaching's not all serious business. You have plenty of fun and some laughs along the way. Have you got any, I guess, funny stories that you can think of to finish us off?
Well, I suppose I've got a couple for you. And one is regarding that World Cup final in 2007. Yeah, it was. Whether this story's true or not, I've no idea. But it was actually in the final huddle on the field after the anthems had been played.
Yeah. Before
kick-off. And all the England players got round there. And we had a hooker, Mark Reagan, who's become a really close friend of mine, which is sometimes slightly unusual between coaches and former players. But we got a similar view on life. And he was a real rough and ready lad from the Bristol areas, but one hell of a motivational player in his own way. You would never find anyone referring to him in leadership books or anything like that, but he can have a real galvanising effect. And this is no disrespect to him, he's still a very close friend of mine. He wasn't the most educated of men in an academic sense. So there was, just after the anthems, as players tend to do before kickoff, got together in a small circle, and I suddenly saw the England players erupt in laughter. And I thought, bloody hell, what's going on? It's World Cup final kickoff time. These guys are falling about laughing. And apparently they got together, and he said, right. He said, you've heard about the phrase, the phoenix rising from the ashes. He finally got to it. He said, right. He said, we're the pheasant that's risen from the ashes in this tournament. Everybody, pheasant? What the bloody hell's this guy on about? But everyone understood what he meant. But a pheasant rising from the ashes instead of the phoenix. That was brilliant, that. Yeah. And another one was regarding one of the players who played in that fight, Jason Robinson, who again is another close friend. He retired, and then I moved back to the northwest of England, and I moved back to help out with some coaching at the club that I played at. And they persuaded Jason, it wasn't me, persuaded Jason to come out of retirement and play for a season. So he signed a contract. It was a semi-professional game. Signed a contract just to play home games. And a lot of it was commercially driven. But he threw his heart and soul into it, and he was fantastic for us. But we played a team, Manchester, towards the end of the season, and they'd had a particularly poor year. The club was really struggling, almost bankrupt. And they'd been beaten really heavily at times. But look, I'm not playing in this game at home, he said, because it's taking the mickey out of the opposition. The head coach said, well, it's part of your contract, you've got to play. So I'll sit on the bench. I said, if you need me, then fine. So 10 minutes to go, we just cracked 100 points. And the head coach says to Jason, right, go on for the last 10 minutes. And he said, you're joking, aren't you? He said, 100 points. So I happen to know the coach of the Manchester team particularly well. And it was a woman. She was the only woman coach in the National Leagues at the time. She told me the story that 10 minutes ago, just scored 100 points. And suddenly she turns around and she sees Jason Robinson stripping off to come onto the field. And she's thinking, Jesus, what is going on here? But fair play to Jason. For 10 minutes, actually the game went on for about another 15. For the last 15 minutes of the game, he said, I've never run as far in my life on a rugby pitch. And he never touched the ball once. He kept running to stay away from the ball. He said, because he felt it was the wrong decision to go on, but he went on because it was part of his contract. But he said, I'm not going to have an impact on the game at all. He said he ran all over the field to make sure he was in a position where the ball wasn't. So if the ball was on one touchline, he'd go to the other one. If it came into the middle of the field, he'd go back to fullback, etc. Just steered away from the ball. So that was pretty good. I've actually got one more, which is it might be a decent one to finish on in terms of from a coach's point of view. Going back to the team that I coached, or the team that insisted on playing without kicking the ball at schoolboy level. So we've gone from international to club now down to schoolboy, this story. There's a lad called Peter Rudolph who sadly was killed in a motorbike accident 2 years ago, who played fly half in that team. And he was only 16 at the time. And, we sort of explored the way to play this game together, because I'd never coached a game like this before. And these guys had never played in one, but not kicking the ball. I remember there's one particular training session. It was quite early on in the term. And I sort of stopped the session. And I said to him, I said, whatever made you make that decision that you just made now? And he looked at me and he said, with all due respect, Mr. Ashton, he said, I'm not quite sure why you asked me that question. He said, because you weren't in a position to see what I did. And I sort of looked at him, I'm thinking, is this guy checking on me or what? Because I'd already coached at international level by that stage. I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, the picture that I saw in front of me was this. He said, where were you stood? And I knew what was coming then. I was stood on the touchline. So what he saw face on, I saw side on. So I didn't see the same picture that he saw. So how could I criticise the decision he'd made if I didn't see what he was seeing? And it was unbelievably valuable. This is 1995, another addition to my coaching learning.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to be in a position to observe whatever it is you want to comment on. If you want to comment on it effectively, with some sort of authority.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's some great insight, Brian. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Brian, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, mate. I've really appreciated you giving up over an hour of your time. I hope things over there in the UK are on the way up in terms of everyone's safety and everything. But mate, thanks so much. I really appreciated, I guess, first of all, meeting you down in Australia in, was it the start of 2020? It was just before COVID happened, I think.
Yeah, I got back. I went from Australia, then I went on to do IRANs in New Zealand after I left you guys. And I actually got back, I think it was a week before we had the first total lockdown in England.
Yeah. Well, you were lucky to get back.
I could have been stuck in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, that would have been terrible for you.
Right. That would have been fantastic for me.
Well, mate, mate, I just want to say really appreciate you giving up your time and offering to come on tonight or this morning in your time. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone who's listening will get a lot out of some of your insight into the game. You've had plenty of years involved in the game and mate, thank you so much.
You're welcome, James. It's been fantastic to see you again. And I'm glad you're doing well, particularly personally as well. I've seen all these promotions and different avenues you're going down in life. So good luck with all that. Stay safe with you and your family. And you never know, when things open up again, we might meet again in the flesh. Yeah, thanks, mate. I really appreciate it. Okay. Cheers. All the best. Talk to you soon. Thanks, Brian. Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye. Thank you for listening to parts 1 and 2 of the conversation with Brian Ashton. Brian has had a wealth of experience in sport, especially rugby union, but one of the key aspects to Brian's development was the transformation into a player-centred coach and the ability to keep learning throughout his career as a coach. Despite all of Brian's experience, he has remained very humble and loves to give back to the sport at all levels. I hope you feel as though you've learnt something from one of the all-time great coaches.